On the way to school, my grandson pointed outside. "Grandma, that's my brother," I answered, "but you don't have a brother." He looked very serious and replied, "Mom told me I have a twin brother." I slammed on the brakes, and when I turned my head to look outside, that face froze me. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story. I want to know how far it has reached. That morning, I woke up like any other day. I stood by the table to carefully check the backpack of Matthew, my grandson. Everything had to be perfect. The notebooks in order, the pencil case with all the colors he likes, and even the white sneakers I had left sparkling clean from the night before. His uniform was perfectly ironed, and it still smelled like the afternoon sun from when I hung it to dry on the patio. I smiled, feeling a relief in my chest, seeing that everything was ready for Matthew's new day. "Matthew, are you done, honey? Don't be late for school," I shouted towards the living room where he was enjoying a sweet pastry. He lifted his head, his mouth full of crumbs, and smiled at me from ear to ear. "I'm done, Grandma. It was so good. Make more tomorrow, okay?" Seeing that carefree smile melted me inside. Matthew is my light, the reason I still get up every day with a little bit of hope, even though life stopped being easy a long time ago. I grabbed the car keys, but before leaving, I reminded him, "Put on a jacket, honey. It's chilly outside." Matthew ran to the door like a lightning bolt, his jacket hanging off his shoulder and his little feet jumping with pure excitement. I shook my head and smiled as I walked behind him, thinking to myself, these kids really don't worry about a thing. Once we were both settled in my old car, Matthew sat in the back, buckled his seatbelt without me having to tell him, and started humming a children's song he had just learned in school. His sweet, off-key little voice made me smile without realizing it. I started the engine and pulled out slowly onto the main avenue that led to his school. The city streets were as noisy as ever at that hour. The yellow school buses were stopping to pick up children, and shouts and greetings could be heard everywhere. On the corner, the food stalls were releasing a steam that smelled delicious like corn. It mixed with the cool morning air. People crossed the street in a hurry, each lost in the rushed rhythm of the day. When the traffic light turned red, I slowed down and stopped at an intersection full of cars. I looked around, trying to stay calm in the middle of all the traffic. Suddenly, from the back seat, Matthew pressed his face to the glass, pointed his little finger outside, and shouted in his clear, excited voice, "Grandma, that's my brother." I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. I turned around and looked where he was pointing, with a mix of surprise and the urge to laugh. Matthew was only 10 years old in age when children are innocent and have big imaginations. I smiled and tried to make my voice sound as gentle as possible. "Matthew, honey, you don't have a brother. You're an only child, remember?" But he shook his head and looked at me with his clear eyes, answering with complete certainty. "But my mom says I have a twin brother." His voice sounded so sure, without a trace of doubt, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That sentence was like a hammer blow straight to my chest. I felt a pang in my heart, a pain so strong it took my breath away. Without realizing it, I pressed the brake harder, and the car jolted, making Matthew lurch forward. "Careful, Grandma!" the boy shouted, but I could barely hear him. My head was spinning, and all the painful memories I had tried to bury for years came flooding back at once. I turned to look outside through the glass fogged by the road dust. And then I saw him. There he was, standing by the median strip, skinny with old faded clothes. In his small hands he offered a box of gum to the stopped cars with a look full of hope. His face was identical to Matthew's, as if it were a portrait. The same thick eyebrows, the same small nose. The only difference was that his skin was tanned by the sun, and his cheeks were sunken, as if he had missed many meals. I held my breath, my eyes glued to him, and then I saw it. Around his neck, shining in the morning sun, he wore a small silver chain with a half-moon charm. I felt my heart stop. I couldn't be mistaken about that necklace. It was one of the two that I had engraved myself and placed around the necks of my twin grandsons the day they were born. A full moon for Matthew and a half moon for David, the grandson I had lost. Or rather, the one they told me had died right after birth. Without thinking for a second, I unlocked the door and ran out, leaving behind the noise of the cars and Matthew's shouts from inside. My legs were trembling, but I kept walking, getting closer and closer until I was standing in front of the boy. He looked up at me, and in his dark eyes, I saw a glint of distrust, like a scared little animal. I tried to make my voice sound calm, even though my heart was pounding. "Hey, kid, what's your name?" The boy hesitated, pressing his lips together, and then answered in a low voice, almost a whisper, "My name is David." That name shot through my body like an electric shock. David. The name of the grandson I held in my arms, even if only for a moment, before they told me he was gone forever. Trembling, I tried to ask him more. "And where do you live? Who takes care of you?" But the boy took a step back, avoiding my gaze, and muttered, "My dad told me not to trust anyone but him. I can't talk to you." His words were like a knife in my heart. His dad. My David, the grandson I had lost. How could he be here alive with a mysterious adoptive father? I wanted to hug him, to ask him more questions, to stop him. But the car horns behind me started blaring like crazy, interrupting my thoughts. People started crossing the street, and the cars around me accelerated impatiently. From inside my car, Matthew rolled down the window and shouted, "Grandma, I'm going to be late!" I turned and looked at the dashboard clock. The hand was approaching Matthew's start time. My mind was a mess, but I couldn't let my grandson be late for school. I looked at David and tried to smile. "I'm going to come back and find you okay." But the boy didn't answer. He just lowered his head and hugged his box of gum as if it were the only thing he had in the world. I had to go back to the car, feeling like each step weighed a ton. When I sat behind the wheel and looked in the rearview mirror, David had already disappeared into the crowd of street vendors, small and fragile in the midst of all those people. He vanished as if he had only been a shadow in a dream. But that half-moon necklace, that face identical to Matthew's, they couldn't be an illusion. They were real, and that reality was digging into my heart, hurting so much it was hard to breathe. In the back seat, Matthew kept singing innocently, with no idea that my world had just been turned upside down in only a few minutes. I left Matthew at the school entrance, and as I watched his small figure disappear behind the green-painted iron gate, my mind was still in chaos. David's face, the half-moon necklace shining in the sun, and his timid little voice. They haunted me. I couldn't just do nothing. I made a U-turn, screeching the tires, and headed back to the intersection where I had found him. I felt a terrible urgency, as if not finding David right at that moment meant losing him for a second time. The street was still crowded, but now the sun was beating down harder on the street stalls. I parked the car on the side. I got out, and even though my legs were shaking, I walked as fast as I could. I passed every stall, from the lady at the hot food stall with her steaming pot to the old man selling newspapers while fanning himself with a paper fan. I showed Matthew's picture to everyone. My voice rushed. "Ma'am, sir, have you seen a boy about this age selling gum around here? He looks just like the one in the photo." But I only got denials. The lady at the food stall looked at me with pity. "No, ma'am, I haven't seen any boy like that." The newspaper vendor sighed. "So many people pass through here, you don't notice everyone." I didn't give up. I kept asking the balloon vendors, the shoe-shine boys, even a young man selling coconut water on the corner. I described every detail. The face just like Matthew's, the faded clothes, the box of gum, and the silver necklace. But nobody knew anything. A woman selling flowers, after looking closely at the photo, just shook her head. "Maybe you were mistaken. There are a lot of kids selling things around here, but none like the one in the photo." I stood there in the middle of the noise, feeling a helplessness that weighed on my chest like a rock. David, and now it was as if the earth had swallowed him without a trace. I clutched Matthew's photo in my hand, my fingers trembling so much that I crumpled a corner. I wanted to scream David's name, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. People kept passing by me unaware of anything, and the noise of the horns, the shouts of the vendors, and the laughter seemed to mock my desperation. Finally, I dragged my feet back to the car. I sat in the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, looking at the intersection, which was now emptier. In my head, the image of David, skinny and alone, repeated over and over. "I'm going to come back and find you. I had told him. But now I felt like I had failed him from the very beginning. When I returned to the mansion, it was almost noon. The huge house with its white walls and elegant windows only made me feel emptier. I went into the living room, where Stephen, my son, was sitting at the dining table reviewing a pile of papers. He was wearing a white shirt, his tie crooked, and you could see the sleepless nights from work in his eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to make my voice sound calm, but I couldn't hide the tremor. "Stephen, I just saw a boy at the intersection. He's identical to Matthew, like 2 drops of water. He said his name is David, and he was wearing the half-moon necklace I made for them." Stephen looked up, frowning, his gaze full of doubt. He put his pen down on the table and said in a slow, cold voice, "Mom, you must be tired. David died at birth." "You know that perfectly well. The doctor told us. You even held him one last time." His words were like a sharp knife stabbing me in the heart. I wanted to scream at him that I wasn't wrong, that I had seen David, that he was alive selling gum at an intersection. But I just stood there, my mouth open, unable to say anything. At that moment, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, came down wearing a light silk dress, her long hair loose. When she heard me mention David, her face turned pale and her eyes widened in fear. I noticed her reaction and was about to say something else, but Sarah interrupted me, her voice trembling, almost shouting, "Mom, why are you bringing that up again? How long are you going to torment me? I lost a child. Do you know how painful that is?" And she burst into tears, covering her face with her hands as her shoulders shook. I froze, feeling like the floor was opening up beneath me. Stephen got up and ran to hug his wife, looking at me reproachfully. "Mom, I'm asking you, please, don't remind her of her pain. Sarah has suffered enough." His voice was low, but every word was like a needle sticking into me. I wanted to explain, to tell him every detail from David's face to the silver necklace, but Stephen's glare and Sarah's crying left me speechless. I felt as if my own family was pushing me aside, as if I were a crazy woman clinging to a story nobody believed. I turned around in silence and went to my room, closing the door behind me. The huge room with the large bed where Arthur, my husband, and I used to sleep now held only me, lonelier than ever. Outside the window the sun was high, and the singing of the birds seemed to mock my pain. I sat at my dressing table, opened the old oak drawer where I keep my most precious treasures. I took out a small velvet box, opened it, and inside were the first sketches I drew when I handmade the 2 necklaces for Matthew and David. The full moon and the half moon, carefully drawn in pencil, were now yellowed with time. I gently ran my finger over the drawing, feeling every line I had traced with such care, every detail I had engraved with all my heart. My tears fell onto the paper, soaking it. "David," I whispered, as if saying his name would bring him back. I remembered the day I engraved that necklace, when I still had hope of holding my 2 twin grandsons, of watching them grow up together. But a few days after they were born, the doctor gave us the news that David had died. I still remember how I felt the world collapse on me, how I hugged that cold little box and cried until I had no tears left. But now I had seen David. I had heard him speak. I had seen the necklace around his neck. How could I be wrong? But Stephen didn't believe me, and Sarah cried as if I were hurting her on purpose. I felt trapped in a nightmare where the truth I had seen with my own eyes was being denied by my family. I hugged the velvet box as the tears continued to fall in silence. "I'm not crazy, Stephen," I told myself in a whisper. "I wasn't mistaken. David is alive, and I'm going to find him, even if I have to do it alone." I sat in that silent room, with the only sound being the ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about Arthur, about the days we spent together, overcoming so many difficulties to build this family. If he were alive, he would surely understand me. He would be on my side. But now I was alone, facing a truth that nobody believed. I dried my tears and carefully put the box back in the drawer. I promised myself that no matter how much it hurt, no matter how lonely I felt, I could not give up. David was out there somewhere, and I was going to find him. I had to uncover the truth, not just for David, but for me, for all the years I had lived and fought for this family. That afternoon I sat alone at the dining table. The golden evening light came through the window and rested on the old tablecloth. The chair opposite me, where Arthur, my husband, used to sit, was now empty, a silent reminder of everything I had lost. I looked at it, my heart aching, and the memories flooded in, taking me back to the days I thought time had buried. Those days when Arthur and I built everything from scratch, and when I believed our family would be strong forever, no matter the storms. More than 30 years ago, Horizon Properties was just a small dream in a cramped little room in the city. Our office had nothing more than an old peeling wooden desk, 2 rusty metal chairs, and a map of the city tacked to the wall, its edges curled from the humidity. I still remember the mornings when Arthur and I would ride around the city on his rickety old scooter looking for plots of land, meeting clients, and convincing everyone to believe in projects that even we weren't sure would work. Our lunch was almost always a sandwich we ate hurriedly on the sidewalk with swigs of bitter black coffee from a street stall. There were days when exhaustion overcame me, and I just wanted to give up, but Arthur would always take my hand and tell me in his firm voice, "Linda, as long as we don't give up, everything will be all right." I remember perfectly the night the company almost went bankrupt. An employee we trusted blindly, whom Arthur called a brother, stole a huge amount of money from our biggest project. The contract was canceled, the clients turned their backs on us, and the bank denied us more loans. That night, Arthur sat silently at the desk, the yellowish light hitting his face, making his eyes look red from lack of sleep. I sat beside him, not knowing what to say. I just made him another cup of coffee. But as dawn began to break, Arthur stood up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "We're going to get out of this, Linda. I promise you." And he did. He went everywhere, convinced every investor, and even sold his mother's wedding ring to pay the debts. I cried when I found out, but Arthur just smiled. The ring is just a material thing. Our family is what's important. Those difficult years slowly faded. Horizon Properties grew, and from a tiny office, it became a corporation with hundreds of employees. We moved into this mansion, the place I always dreamed would be the home for my entire family. When Stephen was a boy, I used to take him to the construction sites. He would put on blue overalls and a giant construction helmet that covered his eyes, and while he played in the sand, he would say in his little voice, "When I grow up, I'm going to build tall houses, so tall they reach the clouds like you." Watching him, Arthur and I would just smile, filled with pride. We thought that by having each other, by having Stephen, we had it all. Then Jessica, my younger daughter, was born. She was completely different from her brother. While Stephen liked to sit next to his dad's drafting table, looking at blueprints, Jessica loved to run through the garden holding a stick and pretending it was a sword, shouting that she was going to catch all the bad guys. I still remember the day when at just 15, she stood in front of Arthur and me and declared firmly, "Mom, Dad, I want to join the police academy. I want to be the one who defends justice." Arthur strongly opposed it. He shook his head and said seriously, "You're a woman. Being a police officer is very dangerous. You should study business so you can take over the company with your brother." But Jessica, with her bright eyes and her chin held high, replied, "Dad, if I don't do it, who will protect people like us?" In the end, Arthur had to smile, even though he was still worried inside. He took her hand and told her, "All right, but promise me you'll always be careful." Watching them, I knew my daughter had inherited the strength of both of us. Our family back then was full of pride. I thought that after so many years of effort, we had finally achieved complete happiness. The company was doing well. Stephen was studying to follow in his father's footsteps, and Jessica was chasing her dream with incredible determination. But then the bad news arrived like a storm. One afternoon, Arthur came back from the hospital, his face pale. He took me to his office, closed the door, and told me, trembling, "Linda, I have cancer. It's terminal." I froze. I felt the world collapsing. I squeezed his hands and asked him, "How is that possible? Couldn't the doctor be wrong?" But Arthur just shook his head, hugged me, and said with a broken voice, "I'm sorry, Linda. I don't want to leave you." Arthur's last months were the most painful of my life. I took care of him, made him the coffee he loved so much, even though he couldn't drink it anymore. I sat by his bed holding his hand, telling him stories of when we first met, of the dreams we built together. He grew weaker, but he still tried to smile to tell me, "Linda, you have to be strong. For Stephen, for Jessica, and for yourself." One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, Arthur called Stephen. Trembling, he handed him the key to the office and said in a thread of a voice, "Son, the company is our life's work. You have to take care of it, okay?" Stephen nodded as tears ran down his cheeks. I listened from the doorway, my heart in pieces. Arthur left us shortly after. The huge house suddenly felt empty. Meals were now just for me. Arthur's laugh was no longer heard, nor his deep voice talking about new projects. I tried to keep busy taking care of my children, but every night when I returned to my room, I sat next to his empty chair staring into space and crying. After Arthur's funeral, the house felt lifeless. Stephen buried himself in work as if it were the only way to forget the pain of losing his father. I watched my son, now a grown man, sitting in Arthur's office buried under piles of papers. His eyes were sunken with dark circles from sleepless nights. Several times I went in, put my hand on his shoulder, and told him softly, "Stephen, the company is important, but family is more important. You have Sarah. Don't leave her alone." Stephen would just nod, but his gaze was lost, as if he were trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "I know, Mom," he would answer in a hoarse voice and lower his head back to the papers. I would stand there looking at my son with an immense pain. I knew he was trying to carry the whole world Arthur had left behind, but I was scared. I was scared he was losing himself. Then one day, like an unexpected ray of sunshine through the dark clouds, good news arrived. Sarah came into the kitchen where I was kneading dough for tamales and told me in a low voice, "Mom, I'm pregnant. It's twins." I froze. I almost dropped the bowl. Tears welled up in my eyes, not of sadness but of happiness. "Really, honey?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining, though there was still a hint of worry. I hugged her tightly, felt her warmth, and in that moment it was as if I saw light in this house again. "2 grandsons," I whispered. "I'm going to have 2 grandsons." From that day on, I started preparing everything with all my love. I knitted soft yarn blankets, choosing blue and white threads, the colors of the sky and of peace. I painted the wooden cribs that had belonged to Stephen and Jessica myself, carefully cleaning every corner so they looked like new. Every night I sat at my table under the warm light of a lamp and carefully drew sketches for 2 silver necklaces I wanted to engrave for them myself, a full moon and a half moon each with a tiny magnet inside. I smiled, imagining how those 2 necklaces would attract each other, forming a half moon hugging the full moon, just as my 2 grandsons would always be together. I told myself in a low voice, "No matter how dark the night is, my boys will always find each other." The day Sarah went into labor, the whole house was in chaos. I drove her to the hospital, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to stay calm, even though I was a nervous wreck inside. In the delivery room, I stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her forehead as the contractions grew stronger. "You can do it, honey," I told her, my voice trembling. "Everything is going to be fine." Sarah bit her lip. Her eyes closed in pain, but she nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. Finally, the clear cry of a baby was heard, like music that ended all worries. 2 beautiful boys were born tiny and fragile in my arms. Trembling, I held each one, placed them on my chest, and felt their weak breathing. Very carefully, I put their necklaces on them. On Matthew, the smaller one, the full moon. On David, the older one, the half moon. Seeing my 2 grandsons, I thought this was the complete happiness I had always dreamed of. The first few days, the house was filled with laughter and baby cries. I held Matthew, then David. I sang them the lullabies my mother used to sing to me. Stephen, although very busy, tried to come home earlier to hug his sons. Sarah, though still weak, smiled every time she saw them. I thought our family had finally found the light after the dark days without Arthur. Every night I sat by the cribs watching my grandsons sleep and silently thanked life for giving me the chance to be a grandmother. But that joy didn't last long. Just a few days later, one morning while I was preparing a bottle for Matthew, The doctor called Stephen and me into his office. He was a middle-aged man with a serious face, and he told us in a grave voice, "Mrs. Sanchez, Mr. Sanchez, I am very sorry. David did not survive. It was an unexpected complication. We did everything we could." I froze as if my blood had turned to ice. "No, it can't be," I stammered. "I held him last night. He was fine." I ran to the intensive care unit begging them to let me see David one last time, but a nurse stopped me and told me in a cold voice, "Ma'am, the hospital has already taken care of the arrangements. Please don't make things complicated." I screamed, my voice broken. "He's my grandson. I have to see him." But Stephen stopped me, his eyes red. "Mom, stop. Don't make things harder." I clutched my chest. I felt my heart breaking. The funeral was quick in a cold room at the funeral home. The small casket was closed, and I just stood there, my chest tight with a lump in my throat that wouldn't let me speak. I couldn't see David one last time. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't say goodbye. That pain was like a knife that stuck in my soul, leaving a wound that would never heal. After that day, Sarah changed completely. She fell into a depression. She would spend hours sitting in her room without moving, her gaze lost. Sometimes, when she saw Matthew, she would suddenly burst into tears, hugging him and murmuring, "Why only you? Why not both?" I tried to console her, but every word I said seemed to make things worse. Once Sarah looked at me with her red eyes and shouted, "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to lose a child." I stayed quiet, not knowing what to say, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. Sarah started asking Stephen for a divorce. She would tell him in a desperate voice, "You deserve a better wife, not a failure like me. I don't want to be a burden." Stephen flatly refused, always trying to console her. "It's not your fault, Sarah. We'll get through this together." But I saw that the light in Stephen's eyes was fading too. He worked more and more. He took refuge in the office, leaving Sarah alone with her depression. She started leaving the house often, saying she was going out with friends to clear her head. I didn't know where she went or what she did, but every time she came back, she was more distant. It was just Matthew and me left. I tried to give my grandson all the love he was missing from his parents. Late at night, after a dinner that Stephen again left halfway through to go to a meeting, I sat in the living room. The dim yellow light illuminated the white walls of the huge house. Matthew was at the table doing his homework with great concentration, moving his little pencil slowly over the notebook. He yawned, and his round little eyes started to close. I got up, made him a glass of warm milk, put it on the table, and said softly, "Go on, honey, finish it and go to sleep. You have to get up early tomorrow." Matthew smiled with a little milk mustache and nodded. "Yes, Grandma." I stroked his head, watching him drink his milk so obediently, and I felt a little warmth in my heart. But in the back of my mind, the image of David, the skinny boy at the intersection with his half-moon necklace, wouldn't stop replaying. I hugged Matthew, sang him an old lullaby in a low voice, and took him to bed. When I tucked him in, I gave him a kiss on the forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams, my love." But seeing Matthew's face, I saw David again, and my heart ached as if someone were squeezing it. I went back to the living room and sat in the old armchair with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The house was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. I looked at the family photo hanging on the wall where we all were. Me, Arthur, Stephen, and Jessica smiling. But now that photo only made me feel lonelier. Stephen was busy. Sarah was distant, and David... Was I just inventing a dream to comfort myself? I clutched the cup, trying to hold back the tears. "You're not crazy, Linda," I told myself. "You saw David. He's alive." Just then, someone knocked on the door, pulling me from my thoughts. I was surprised. I got up and went to open it. In front of me was Jessica, my younger daughter, still in her dark blue police uniform, her black hair still damp from the sweat of a long shift. The heavy backpack on her shoulder made her lean a bit. Under the porch light, Jessica's eyes shone, but I noticed she was worried. "Mom, you look so sad. Did something happen?" she asked as soon as she came in, her voice full of concern. I invited her in. I made her a hot tea, and the smell of mint filled the air. We sat across from each other, and I started to tell her everything, my voice trembling as if I feared that if I didn't say it right, then I wouldn't have the courage again. I told her about the morning at the intersection, about the boy identical to Matthew, about the half-moon necklace shining on his neck. I told her how Stephen didn't believe me, how Sarah started to cry, and how lonely I felt when no one supported me. "I saw David, Jessica," I said, as tears ran down my cheeks. "I know it was him, but nobody believes me. I feel like I'm losing everything all over again." Jessica remained silent, her eyes fixed on me. She didn't interrupt, just listened, gripping her teacup as if to control her emotions. When I finished my story with a sigh, Jessica put the cup on the table, looked me directly in the eyes, and said firmly, "I believe you, Mom. If you say you saw David, then something strange is going on here, and we're going to find out the truth together." Her words were like a ray of light in the darkness of my heart. I was speechless, and my trembling hand reached for hers. Her hand was strong, warm, and she squeezed it as if to give me strength. For the first time in many days, I felt I was no longer alone. Jessica took a small notebook with a worn leather cover from her pocket and started taking notes. "Mom, tell me every exact detail," she said with the same seriousness she used at the police station. I tried to remember the exact spot of the intersection, the time David's faded clothes, the box of gum he held, and even his look of distrust when I asked his name. Jessica wrote quickly with clear handwriting. Each line was like a map that would lead us to the truth. "Do you remember exactly what brand of gum he had?" she asked, her eyes shining with determination. I nodded. The image of the box was clear in my mind. They were the cheap kind, the ones sold individually at markets. Green, the brand was Chiclets. Jessica nodded, wrote something else, and then looked up. "Mom, I don't think this is that simple. If David is alive, someone hid him on purpose, and I'm not going to leave you alone in this." Hearing her, I couldn't hold back the tears. I had lost Arthur. I had lost David, or so I thought. And now that Stephen and Sarah had turned their backs on me, Jessica was here like a fire warming my heart. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Thank you, honey. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jessica smiled that strong but loving smile that I remembered in Arthur. "I'm your daughter, Mom. I'm not going to let you fight alone," she said, and then she stood up and put her backpack on the floor. "I'm staying here tonight. Tomorrow I'll request the day off. Will you come with me to the hospital?" I nodded, feeling a part of the weight I was carrying lift. The next morning I woke up before sunrise when only a gray light was coming through the window. I was in the kitchen carefully toasting some slices of bread, and the smell of butter filled the room. I prepared 2 cups of coffee with milk, one for me and one for Jessica, hoping the warmth of the coffee would help calm me before the important day ahead. Today, Jessica and I were going to the hospital, the place where my family's tragedy began, where I lost David, or at least where they told me I had. I put the plate with the toast on the table, my heart aching, but also with a small spark of hope. With Jessica by my side, I no longer felt alone. Jessica came down from the living room, still in her dark blue police uniform, her black hair pulled back tightly. Her badge pinned to her chest shone in the kitchen light. She looked at me and smiled a little. "You're up early, Mom. It smells delicious. I'm already hungry." I passed her the plate of toast, trying to smile. "Eat, honey. It's going to be a long day." Jessica nodded and took a bite of toast, but I knew her mind was focused on what we had to do. The determination in her eyes reminded me of Arthur, of how he always stayed calm and strong in the face of any problem. I gripped my coffee cup and told myself I had to be strong like Jessica, like Arthur, to face what awaited us. We got in the car, me driving, and Jessica in the passenger seat, her notebook on her lap. The way to the hospital was so familiar, it hurt. 10 years ago, I had driven this same street taking Sarah when she went into labor. Today I was returning not to welcome my 2 grandsons, but to find the truth about one of them. The hospital corridor was still brightly lit and smelled strongly of disinfectant. The sound of footsteps, the voices of nurses, and the squeak of wheelchairs transported me back to that terrible day. I hesitated, My legs felt heavy, but Jessica didn't. She walked straight to the reception desk, showed her police badge, and said in a clear, firm voice, "I'm Officer Jessica Sanchez. I need to review the medical file for a birth on April 15, 2015. Patient Sarah Marquez." The receptionist, a young woman with her hair pulled back, looked at the badge and then at Jessica, a little nervous. "Yes, let me check, but for files that old, I need permission from the administrator," she said, hesitating. I was standing behind Jessica, my heart pounding. I was afraid they would say no, that the door to the truth would be closed in our faces. But Jessica didn't flinch. She nodded and said calmly, "Then please call the administrator. This is an important matter." The receptionist nodded and quickly picked up the phone. I looked at my daughter, feeling a mix of pride and worry. Jessica, with that firmness, was doing what I couldn't have done alone. A while later, the administrator appeared, a middle-aged woman with a serious face. After talking for a few minutes, she took us to a small room at the end of the hall where they kept the old files. They handed us a thin folder, the pages already yellowed. I looked at the folder and felt a knot in my stomach. This was all that remained of the day David was born, and also the day they told me he had died. Jessica turned the pages carefully, taking quick notes with a pencil. I got closer to read the scribbled letters, and suddenly my eyes stopped on one page. David's death certificate. But what chilled my blood was that the space for the witness signature was blank. Not a signature, not a stamp. The date and time of death were written in a rush with shaky handwriting, completely different from the rest of the information. And above all, the name of the doctor on call that night, Dr. Robert Warren, was underlined in blue ink as if someone had wanted to highlight it on purpose. I pointed to the paper, my voice trembling. "Jessica, look at this. Why is there no witness signature and this handwriting isn't the same as the rest?" Jessica frowned. Her sharp eyes scanned every line. "You're right, Mom," she whispered, writing faster. Then she looked up and asked the administrator, "Where is Dr. Robert Warren now?" The administrator shook her head and said without emotion, "After that shift, he resigned suddenly. No one could contact him. They say he left the country." Jessica nodded, but I saw her eyes gleam like a predator that has just found a clue. As we left the archive, we passed the hallway where Sarah had stayed. The smell of disinfectant and the cold white light gave me a chill. Just then, an older nurse with graying hair came out of a room. She looked at me and suddenly stopped, surprised. "Mrs. Sanchez, right?" she asked in a low voice. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Do you remember me?" The nurse nodded and led us to a corner of the hallway where no one was around. She whispered, her voice worried. "I still remember that night when Mrs. Marquez had her twins. It was very strange. Doctor." Warren went into the delivery room and locked the door. He didn't let anyone in, not even us. I stayed outside. I heard both babies cry, but then they only brought out one. I felt dizzy, as if the floor were sinking. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice breaking. The nurse looked around as if afraid someone would hear her and continued, "I'm not sure, but I felt something wasn't right. Dr. Warren didn't let anyone in, and the next morning he said one baby had died, but I never saw the body. I was scared, and I didn't dare ask any more." Jessica immediately took out her notebook. She wrote down the nurse's name, Helen, and asked her, "Would you be willing to testify if necessary?" Mrs. Helen hesitated for a moment and then nodded. "If it's for that child, yes, I will." Back in the car, Jessica spread all the papers on the seat and pointed out every strange thing to me. "Mom, look," she said, her voice determined. "The death certificate has no signature, the handwriting doesn't match, and Dr. Warren disappeared right after. This isn't a simple mistake. This was planned. I'm sure someone altered the records to hide the truth about David." I squeezed my daughter's hand, feeling the strength and determination in every word. For the first time in so many years, I felt I wasn't alone. "Jessica, I don't know how to thank you," I said as tears ran down my face. Jessica squeezed my hand and smiled. "We're family, Mom. I'm not going to let them keep hiding David." Sunday morning, I woke up with an anxiety that wouldn't leave me in peace. The sun came through the window, illuminating the wooden floor, but my heart felt heavy as if covered by a dark cloud. Today, Jessica and I had decided to go back to the intersection where I found David. That place where the memory of the skinny boy with the half-moon necklace haunted me every night. I made 2 cups of coffee, trying to keep my hand from shaking as I poured Jessica's milk. "Today we're going to look for more clues, right, honey?" I asked, trying to sound calm. Jessica, already in her police uniform, nodded with a fixed gaze. "Yes, Mom. I feel like we're close to the truth now." Her words were like a small light, but I didn't dare get my hopes up too high. I had already failed once at that intersection, and the fear of losing David's trail again made my heart ache. We got in the car, me at the wheel, driving slowly through the familiar city streets. As I reached the intersection, I slowed down, searching the crowd with my eyes. The balloon vendors with their colorful bunches, the shoeshine boys with their dirty hands, and the cotton candy stalls, they were all there like a portrait of the city's daily life. But David wasn't. I searched every corner, every face, hoping to find those dark eyes and that shining silver necklace. But nothing. I felt my spirit sink as if a part of my hope had been carried away by the wind. Jessica put her hand on my shoulder and told me to calm down. "It's okay, Mom. We'll ask one by one. If David was here, someone has to know something." She motioned for me to park, and we got out, each going our separate ways. I approached the newspaper stand of an old man with white hair and glasses slipping down his nose. I showed him Matthew's photo, trying to speak gently. "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a boy about 10 years old with a face just like this child's? He sells gum around here." The old man squinted to see the photo and then slowly shook his head. "I don't really remember, ma'am. A lot of kids pass through here selling things. I don't notice all of them." I nodded and thanked him, but my heart felt tight. I kept walking down the sidewalk and asked the lady at a fruit stand who was wearing a bright red apron. "Ma'am, have you seen a boy who looks like the one in the photo? He sells gum, wears old clothes, and a silver necklace." She looked at the photo and then shook her head. "Yes, there are several kids who sell things, but I haven't seen anyone like that all week." Every answer was like another stab to my fragile hope. I stood in the middle of the crowd, clutching Matthew's photo, feeling a helplessness that threatened to pull me under. "Where are you, David?" I asked myself, tears welling up. I had promised him I would find him, but now I felt useless, like a traveler lost in the desert. Just as I was about to give up, Jessica ran towards me and pulled me by the arm toward a food stall on the corner. "Mom, come here," she said, her voice full of hope. "This lady might know something." The tamale lady, a plump woman with gray hair and a bun, was hurriedly pouring salsa over hot tamales. The smell of corn and chili reminded me of the mornings I cooked for Matthew. Jessica showed her Matthew's photo and asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, have you seen a boy just like the one in the photo? He sells gum here at the intersection." The woman looked at the photo, sighed, and looked at us with pity. "Of course," she said, lowering her voice. "The little boy who sells gum. He's identical to the one in the photo. He always used to stand on that corner in the mornings, but for about a week now. No, I think several. I haven't seen him." My heart leaped. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "Do you know anything about him, where he lives, or who takes care of him?" The woman looked around, as if afraid someone would hear her, and then lowered her voice even more. "People rumor that he's the one who helps at the house of Mr. Roger Collins, the owner of Solstice Construction. Those people are very rich. They have a mansion on the outskirts. They say the man sends him to sell gum every day to teach him something. But lately he disappeared. I don't know anymore." The name Roger Collins hit me like a lightning bolt. Roger, the worst enemy of Stephen's company. The man Arthur always warned me was a snake, always looking for a way to screw us over. I froze. My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped Matthew's photo. My grandson David in the hands of my family's enemy. How was that possible? I looked at Jessica and saw that her gaze had also hardened, not with fear, but with anger. "Ma'am, could you give me your phone number?" Jessica asked, her voice calm but sharp. "If you remember anything else, please let me know." The woman nodded, wrote her number on a scrap of paper, and gave it to Jessica. "Be careful, young lady," she said in a low voice. "Mr. Collins's house isn't just any place." We left the stall and walked back to the car in silence. I sat in the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine. I gripped Matthew's photo so tightly, my nails dug into my skin. "Jessica," I whispered, "if David is really with Roger Collins, why would he have him?" Jessica put her hand on mine and said firmly, "I don't know, Mom, but I'm going to find out. Roger Collins might be the key. I'm going to investigate his file, see if he has anything to do with the hospital." I nodded, but inside fear and rage were growing. Roger Collins, the man who had tried to destroy Arthur's company, was now connected to David. Was it all a coincidence or part of a bigger plan? That same afternoon, Jessica and I couldn't wait any longer. I started the car and drove towards the outskirts where Roger Collins' mansion was. The street leading to his house was strangely silent. 2 rows of tall pine trees cast shadows, and the sun filtered through the leaves, creating patches of light and darkness on the pavement. I drove slowly, trying to calm down, but every turn of the tires made my heart beat faster. A huge, cold black iron gate appeared in front of us, covered in security cameras that shone like soulless eyes. I stopped the car, turned off the engine, but my hands were still gripping the steering wheel. Sweating. I turned to Jessica and asked with a trembling voice, "Should we ring the bell, honey? Or, oh, maybe we should wait." Jessica frowned. Her sharp eyes scanned the entire place. "Mom, wait a moment," she whispered. "I don't like this. We don't know what's in there. We should observe first." I nodded, although I was burning with impatience inside. I wanted to run out, knock on that door, and demand to see David, but I knew Jessica was right. We couldn't act recklessly. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the fear and rage I felt. Just then, the heavy iron gate slowly opened with a metallic screech that startled me. A luxury car, black and shiny, glided inside, gleaming in the afternoon sun. Jessica and I quickly hid behind a bougainvillea bush, my heart pounding as if it would burst from my chest. I squeezed Jessica's hand, trying to breathe calmly, but then as the gate was closing, a familiar figure came out of the mansion. My heart stopped. It was Sarah, my daughter-in-law. She was on the arm of Roger Collins, smiling as if they were a very close couple. Sarah was wearing a bright red silk dress, her hair down, and Roger, in an impeccable gray suit, leaned in to whisper something in her ear. My blood ran cold. Sarah, whom I had loved like a daughter, whose hand I had held in the delivery room, was now on the arm of my family's enemy. I wanted to scream, to run out and confront them, but Jessica squeezed my hand, signaling me to be quiet. We stayed hidden, trying to listen. They stopped at the entrance, and Roger's voice sounded low but sharp. "Are you sure that stupid old woman? No one will ever believe her. By now the brat David is locked up in the house. No matter how much she looks for him, she won't find him. And whatever she says, no one will listen." Sarah laughed, a high-pitched sound that twisted my insides. "Don't worry," she said, her voice sweet but full of malice. "Stephen is too busy with the company, and she's just a senile old woman. I made the whole family think she's crazy. They will never find David." I put my hand to my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Sarah, whom I had loved and consoled, was now talking about me as if I were a fool, and about David, my grandson, as a piece in her game. Roger grunted. "Good, but don't get careless. I don't just want the boy. I want Stephen's company to sink. At the board meeting next week, I'm going to deliver the final blow. Stephen is going to lose everything." Sarah nodded, a glint in her eyes. "You leave it to me. I'll take care of distracting Stephen so you can do your thing." Then they hugged a passionate embrace right at the entrance, as if they were celebrating a victory. I was in shock. I put my hands to my chest and was about to scream, but Jessica pulled me down and whispered, "Mom, stay calm. We need proof." I looked at her and saw that Jessica had already taken out her phone and was recording the whole scene. The small screen lit up, capturing every word, every gesture of Sarah and Roger. I squeezed my daughter's hand as tears ran down my cheeks. "Jessica, how is this possible?" I whispered, my voice broken. "Sarah, why would she do this to her own family?" Jessica didn't answer. She just kept recording with a cold but determined look. When Sarah got into her luxury car and disappeared among the trees, I collapsed onto the grass, crying uncontrollably. "David, my boy. They have him locked up in there," I murmured, feeling all my strength leave me. Jessica helped me up. Her voice was low but firm. "Mom, we can't get emotional now. This video is proof, but we need more to expose them. You have to be strong for David." I nodded, even though my heart ached like never before. I gripped Jessica's phone where the video that could reveal everything was stored. "You're right," I whispered, drying my tears. I barely slept that night. I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock in the darkness. As soon as dawn broke, I heard a noise in the living room. Jessica was already awake. She was sitting at Arthur's old desk, the blue light of the laptop illuminating her face. She was searching the personnel files of Solstice Construction Rogers Company. I went in with a hot cup of coffee and put it on the table. "Did you find anything?" I asked, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Jessica looked up, her eyes red with fatigue but shining with determination. "Mom, I found a list of employees they fired about 2 years ago. There's one name that catches my eye, Rosa Mendez. She was Roger's housekeeper for many years. If anyone knows about David, it could be her." I nodded, my heart pounding. Rosa Mendez. That name was like a small light in the middle of my storm. Jessica started making calls. She tried to contact several people on the list, but most didn't answer or just responded curtly and hung up. Finally, when she called Mrs. Rosa's number, it rang, and an older woman's voice, very cautious, answered. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling as if she were scared. Jessica introduced herself briefly, her voice calm but firm. "This is Officer Jessica Sanchez from the City Police. I'd like to talk to you about a child who might be connected to Mr. Roger Collins. Could you meet with me?" There was a long silence on the other end, and then Mrs. Rosa replied coldly, "I don't want anything to do with Mr. Roger. Don't call again." And she hung up. I felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped on me. "Jessica, now what?" I asked, discouraged. But she didn't give up. She looked at me and handed me the phone. "Mom, you try talking to her. If she took care of David, maybe you can convince her." I took the phone, took a deep breath, and dialed again. When Mrs. Rosa answered, I didn't let her speak and said quickly, my voice trembling, "Mrs. Rosa, this is Linda Stephen Sanchez's mother, the boy you took care of. He's my grandson. His name is David. I'm begging you, help me bring him back to his family. I just want my boy to be safe." My words came out in a rush, loaded with all the pain and hope of 10 years. There was silence on the other end again, so long I thought Mrs. Rosa had hung up. But then I heard a sigh, and she said, her voice softer, "All right, I'll see you, but not in a public place. There's a small cafe next to the train tracks on Juarez Street, tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon. But I nodded over and over, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you, ma'am." "Thank you so much," I said as tears ran down my face. Jessica patted me on the shoulder and smiled. "Mom, we have a chance." The next day, Jessica and I arrived at the old cafe on Juarez Street. The worn wooden tables and chairs, the smell of roasted coffee, and the distant sound of the train reminded me of the days when Arthur and I sat in places like this dreaming about the future. We chose a table in the corner and waited. At 3 o'clock sharp, a thin woman entered wearing a dark dress and a straw hat covering her gray hair. It was Rosa Mendez. Her eyes darted around nervously as if she feared someone was following her. I stood up and signaled to her. She approached, sat down, and grabbed the cup of coffee I had already ordered for her, but she didn't drink. "Mrs. Rosa, thank you for coming," I said, trying to sound as kind as possible. She nodded, but her gaze remained suspicious. Jessica began to speak. "Could you tell us about the boy you took care of at Mr. Rogers' house?" Mrs. Rosa was silent for a moment and then began to speak, her voice trembling. "I was Mr. Rogers' housekeeper for 10 years. One day he brought home a child. He said it was his adopted son and put him in my care. The boy was about 3 years old, small and skinny. He called him David." I felt my heart clench. Was the boy wearing a silver necklace with a half moon? I asked quickly, my hand shaking so much I spilled a little coffee. Mrs. Rosa nodded, her gaze softening as if remembering. "Yes, His name was David. He always wore that necklace. He never took it off. I couldn't hold back the tears. He's my grandson, I whispered, my voice broken. Jessica gripped her pen and quickly wrote down every word. Mrs. Rosa continued, her voice growing more tremulous. They kept David locked in the basement almost all day. Mr. Roger wouldn't let him go to school or go out to play. When he turned 8, he started sending him to the intersection to sell gum. He said it was to get him used to the hard life. It broke my heart to see him like that. I secretly gave him sweet bread. I gave him a toy car. He called me Aunt Rosa. She paused to wipe away a tear. He was a very good boy, but he was always scared. Jessica asked in a sharp voice, "Why were you fired?" Mrs. Rosa looked around and lowered her voice. One time I overheard Mr. Roger and Miss Sarah planning how to ruin Stephen Sanchez's company. They talked about using David to pressure him to distract Stephen. I got so scared I wanted to call the police, but Mr. Roger found out. He fired me, didn't pay me what he owed, and even accused me of being a thief so no one would believe me. I squeezed Mrs. Rosa's hand and begged her, "Mrs. Rosa, please testify. Help me save David." She was silent, her eyes full of pain. Then slowly, she opened her old purse, took out a small red paint-chipped toy car, and put it on the table. "I kept this because I always believed that one day that boy would be free." She said, her voice choked. "I will testify for David." Jessica immediately took her statement, noted every detail, and arranged to take Mrs. Rosa to sign it before a notary. We left the cafe as evening was falling. The reddish sunlight hit the train tracks and made the toy car I held in my hand shine. I clutched it tightly, feeling as if I were hugging David himself. "Thank you, Rosa," I said, crying again. "You've given me back my hope." Mrs. Rosa nodded with a tender look. "Save that boy, Mrs. Sanchez. He deserves to have a family." On the way back, I sat in the car holding the toy car. Jessica drove her eyes fixed on the road, but I saw her eyes were red. "Mom, we're almost there," she said. "With Mrs. Rosa's statement, we can take this case to court." I nodded. With that toy car in my hand and Jessica by my side, I knew I was closer to David than ever. A few days later, the complaint file was complete. Jessica and I had worked non-stop, carefully arranging every piece of evidence. The strange hospital papers, the video Jessica recorded in front of Roger's mansion, the detailed statement from Rosa Mendez, and even the toy car she had saved. A small but meaningful piece of proof. Every night I sat at the table reviewing every detail, my heart in pieces, thinking about David, about the years he spent locked in the dark. But I wasn't alone anymore. Jessica was always by my side with the firmness and strength of a police officer, helping me keep faith that the truth would come out. The day of the trial, I entered the city courthouse with a heavy heart. Jessica walked beside me in her immaculate uniform. Her gaze was sharp but reassuring. Behind us came Stephen and Matthew. Matthew held his dad's hand, looking at everything with curiosity in his clear eyes, while Stephen walked with his head down, his face tense. The press was crowded at the door, camera flashes pointed at us, and reporters murmured like a swarm of bees. I squeezed Jessica's hand, trying to breathe deeply, but I felt like I was suffocating. It was the first time I was facing Sarah and Roger since that terrible night, and I didn't know how I would feel looking them in the eye. In the courtroom, Sarah sat in the defendant's dock, pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She wore a simple dress. She no longer had that arrogant look from when she was on Roger's arm. Roger, on the other hand, held his head high, his eyes full of hatred. His gray suit was still impeccable, as if this were just a business meeting. I looked at him and felt an immense rage. He had stolen David from my family. He had turned my grandson into a piece of his revenge. I wanted to scream, to run and confront him, but Jessica put her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Calm down, Mom. Today the truth will speak." The prosecutor began his opening statement. He presented the evidence one by one in a monotonous but sharp voice. When the video Jessica recorded appeared on the big screen, the whole room held its breath. Sarah's mocking voice echoed, "That stupid old woman. No one will ever believe her. By now the brat David is locked up in the house." I looked at Stephen and saw my son had his head down, clenching his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. Matthew, sitting next to him, looked at the screen without understanding and then turned to me to ask in a low voice, "Grandma, who is my mom talking about?" I hugged him and whispered, "It's nothing, Matthew. I'll explain later." But my heart ached. I didn't know how I would tell my grandson that his mother had betrayed his entire family. Then they called Rosa Mendez to the stand. She went up thin, her hands trembling but her gaze firm. She recounted in detail how they kept David locked in the basement, how Roger forced him to sell gum, and how they threatened and fired her when she tried to help him. "I took care of that boy as if he were my son," she said, her voice choked. "He called me Aunt Rosa. I can't forget the look of fear in his eyes every time Mr. Roger appeared." Murmurs were heard in the courtroom. Some people cried. I squeezed Jessica's hand as tears ran down my face. Rosa, the woman I had only met once, had given me hope, and now she was here, telling the truth for David. When the judge asked for the motive, Roger jumped up and shouted like a madman. "Your father ruined my family. Arthur Sanchez fired my father for embezzlement. My mother died because we had no money for her medicine, and my father killed himself shortly after. I swore I would make the entire Sanchez family pay. David was my tool, and Sarah was just a pawn in my game. I never loved her." He pointed at Sarah with contempt. The entire room fell silent. Sarah burst into tears. She turned to Stephen and said with a trembling voice, "Forgive me, Stephen. I just wanted to be with Roger. I didn't know he was just using me." Stephen didn't answer. He just lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. I looked at my son, my heart in pieces. Stephen had loved and protected Sarah, but she had stabbed him in the heart. The prosecutor finished listing the charges: kidnapping of a minor falsification of documents, financial fraud, conspiracy for corporate sabotage, and witness tampering. The judge slammed the gavel and delivered the sentence. Roger was sentenced to many years in prison, and Sarah, as an accomplice, also received a just sentence. As they were taken away, I looked at Sarah, but I no longer felt anger, only sadness. She had been part of my family, but now she had lost everything. It was already getting dark when we left the courthouse. Stephen walked beside me and said in a hoarse voice full of regret, "Mom, forgive me. I didn't believe you. I left you alone in all of this." I took my son's hand and shook my head. "I don't blame you, Stephen. I just want our family to be united again." Matthew took my hand, looked up and asked me, "Grandma, is my brother David coming with us now?" I smiled, though tears were still falling. "Yes, my love." A social worker approached, holding the hand of a skinny, dark-eyed boy, still scared, who was hiding behind her. "David." I opened my arms and called his name softly. "David." The boy hesitated, his gaze timid, but suddenly he ran and hugged me tightly, saying in his little voice, "Grandma." That word was like a ray of light that ended all the darkness I felt. I hugged David tightly. I felt his little body tremble in my arms. "I'm here now, David," I whispered, as my tears wet his hair. "I'm never letting you go again," Matthew shouted with joy and started running around his brother. "I have a brother, I really have a brother." He took out his full moon necklace and brought it close to David's half moon. The two pieces of silver fit together. The magnet united them, and they shone under the moon that was beginning to rise. I looked at my two grandsons, my heart full of a happiness mixed with pain. 10 years. David had suffered so much, but now he was back. Stephen knelt and hugged his two sons as late tears ran down his cheeks. "Forgive me, David," he said, his voice broken. I didn't know you were alive." David looked up still with a little fear in his eyes, but he nodded gently and hugged his dad. Jessica put her hand on my shoulder and smiled. "We did it, Mom." I took my daughter's hand, feeling a gratitude I couldn't express with words. I looked at the sky where the moon was growing brighter among the clouds. "Arthur, are you watching?" I whispered to myself. "Our family is complete again. The moon will shine again no matter how dark the night." I hugged David and Matthew. I felt the warmth of my two grandsons, and I knew that although this path had been very painful, I had found my light. I have walked a path full of tears, loss, and betrayal, but looking back, I understand that it was those trials that made me stronger than ever. The lesson I want to share with everyone is this: never let others deny the truth your heart recognizes, and do not stay silent when justice is buried. The love for my family, for my grandsons, became the flame that guided me through the darkness. Life can take many things from us, but faith, perseverance, and the desire to find justice will help us stay standing. I want everyone, especially women, who sometimes feel weak, to remember that neither age nor circumstances are a reason to give up. We always have the right to rise up to fight for the truth and to protect what is most sacred in our lives. The story you just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I leave you 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.